I want to thank you for listening to this conversation with me and my friend Dr. Daylan Moore. Daylan and I went to undergrad together and we had similar degrees, but he went on to become a mental health expert. So, in this conversation, we address mental health, Christian spirituality, the Black church experience, college life, and a lot of other topics. In fact, the conversation was so good that we went way over our 1 hour mark. So, my hope is that something said in this conversation is beneficial to you and wherever you are on your journey. If you would like to continue this conversation with Daylan, I would encourage you to add him on LinkedIn. You can find him by searching his name, Daylan J. Moore. You should also be able to access his dissertation on his LinkedIn profile. If you want to contact him more directly, you can email him at daylanjamesmoore@gmail.com. And if you would like to contact me directly, you can email me at hargonw@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening to this conversation. I hope it blesses you. Well, I'm here with my friend Daylan Moore, Dr. Daylan Moore. This doctor credential is pretty new, isn't it? You just
Yeah.
you just finished up your PhD work.
Yes, I'm about a month into finishing that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Congrats. I know that feels really good.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
So,
Thank
yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for this conversation. I was thinking about just thinking about our college experiences and what I remember about you. And there's a
you.
couple things that came to my mind. I remember your preaching. You're a great preacher. I remember thinking like, man, this guy's just on it, and I barely see him. I don't think I saw you use notes as you were preaching, so I was really impressed with that. I do also remember the white band that you had with your Apple Watch. I remember that because you had that Apple Watch when you were preaching. So I would just this all these things I would pick up that I remember. I also remember just how cool and humble and down to earth you were. We didn't have too many exchanges in college. I think our relationship was kind of from afar in some ways because we're in the same program,
Hmm.
Bible program. But I remember just all the engagements I had with you. Like you were down to earth, but you're a beast at the same time. so
Thank you.
so, and I see that. I was looking at your Facebook today, just looking at all these things that you've been a part of since we've graduated. And you graduated 2018, right? We're the same class.
Um, 2019, so just right
2019?
after.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
right after me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're a beast, man. So I'm just really excited for this conversation. I'm excited to hear more about your story and what you're up to now and just unpacking your perspective.
Yeah.
So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Thank you. And man, I have always been. It felt like we did graduate together, so that's why
Yeah.
it seems like we did. But I've always been appreciative of you and your flow and your creativity.
Mm.
That's something I may get into a little bit later on. Just
Okay.
even in the preaching or faith type of experience, the way we kind of feel things
Mm.
sometimes we're void of that, and particularly no knock on our institution, but some of our
Yeah.
Western institutions kind of
Yeah.
we're all in the head, and
That's right, brother.
there's something about feeling it. Feeling is not
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
I appreciate that.
I
Appreciate you,
appreciate you
man.
bringing that up. We're gonna have to unpack that. I know that for sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
before we get there, I want to know more about who you are, and I want to know like what are some of the significant parts of your story.
yeah, man. Well, I'm an Arkansas boy through and through. Grew up
Okay.
here
Hmm.
in the natural state, and my journey has been. I grew up in church and family and all of that, and the Bible Belt. And for about the first half of my childhood was in uh, predominantly black settings, so
Mm.
predominantly black family,
Hmm.
neighborhood, church, school, all of that. And about junior high, there was a shift or a transition, a move out of um, what some might call the other side of town or close
Mm.
to the hood or ghetto, whatever
Mm.
words people like to use,
Yeah.
to predominantly white church, school, neighborhood in that process. And so that was probably one of the most significant things for me that actually kind of led me to my journey at
Mm.
Harding
Mm.
with undergrad and master's work at Harding.
Hmm.
Um, so those are some significant things. I met my wife at Harding,
Okay.
and she's a couple years younger than me, and so we knew each other in undergrad. And then I came back for grad school, and then that's when she was finishing undergrad,
Okay.
and when we kind of rekindled the
Uh-huh.
fire,
Uh-huh.
whatever you call it.
Uh-huh.
And so that's a significant part of my experience
Mm.
is like education, church, and just relationships throughout that,
Yeah.
been kind of significant for me, and
Hmm.
particularly like in those two type settings,
Yeah.
predominantly black and predominantly white.
Hmm. So what? So you were raised in Arkansas and you were in these predominantly black spaces. So what brought you to these other scenarios? How did you get to Harding? How did you end up getting around other people?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I think even in those predominantly black settings, so up until I was around 11-ish, 11 or 12, somewhere in there, we did like my Black Church of Christ, Louis Street Church of Christ, where I
Hmm.
grew up in. We did. I think it was called pageants. I think they still do it today. It's like a national Christian. I can't think of the name of it, but it's a thing that they would rotate it among Christian colleges. But it was predominantly Black Christians, Black Church
Uh-huh.
of Christ.
Yeah.
And I remember going to some of the stuff at Harding, and I was like, man, this is a cool campus up here. I didn't think too much about it besides
Hmm.
there. But then after like some family job changes and move changes in the area, we moved into a predominantly white neighborhood, and then
Hmm.
predominantly white church after a church split. So kind of went through church split stuff when I
Hmm.
was in junior high,
Mm.
up in a predominantly white, couple predominantly white congregations.
Hmm.
And then that was kind of the thing that led me to Harding was
Mm.
part of a predominantly white school at that time and
Yeah.
in school. And so that was kind of almost like a natural progression as well. I looked at some other schools and colleges, but a lot of folks that I admired or respected were products of like their education was from
Hmm.
art, and
Mm.
so that my exposure at that time
Okay.
at places. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you got to Harding and you decided to become you're a Bible and preaching major, right? Or was it Bible and ministry?
Yeah, yeah. I actually first I did it what I think a lot of people do in the first year or so, switching and
Uh-huh. I did
and so
that. Uh-huh.
yeah, I came in as a kinesiology major. I
Okay.
had a couple influential coaches growing up that were coaches and they were preachers,
Hmm.
and so I was like, oh, I can do that. Like I can coach and preach,
Uh-huh.
and so I was actually in my first year at Harding, and I was doing some kinesiology classes, and I think it might have been second semester or so. I had already had some hours in, and so I was already like observing some classrooms, so like doing some education classes and
Hmm.
kinesiology classes, and I was like, man, I like this. This is good. But at the same time, I was like working with a church out in I don't know if you know where Augusta is outside of Sarasota.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
been to that church and I've done a couple
Okay.
things there.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
where I was at. 'Cause,
Okay.
before that, my brother, he's 6 years older than me, and so when he spent a little time at Harding, he did some stuff at that church as well.
Hmm.
And so then it was almost natural. When I came, I kind of got connected with them. And I remember there was this one weekend I was doing some work with them as I was also doing the kinesiology stuff at Harding. And I was like,
Hmm.
I do want to do ministry, I think.
Mm.
I think this is what I want to do. And then that was kind of evolved into like, okay, we're going to switch our major to major in Bible and preaching and
Hmm.
minor in psychology. I had still some leanings from that, from
Okay.
kind of different places in high school, and was
Hmm.
just into that realm of things. And so
Uh-huh.
that was like the natural progression into like Bible and preaching with that psychology minor
Mm.
was really just kind of being in the ministry stuff that I was like, I think I want to do this. I think this is
Mm.
at that time is kind of what God has called me to. It's evolved and changed since then, but like it
Yeah.
kind of what the process was like for me.
Now tell me about this preaching. I mean, were you preaching at your churches growing up? No, how did preaching play, what role did that play in your desire to pursue ministry?
Yeah, I think I, I think I preached my first sermon at 8. I was baptized
Oh,
at 8, and I think
wow.
that was the first time. And
8
so,
years old. What was the sermon
yeah,
about at 8?
man, I have no idea what this
Wow, that's
was about.
amazing.
And so I had those, what is it called? Those things that little kids they try to get drink of the water fountain, little step stool things.
Yeah,
But I had one of
yeah.
those behind the pulpit, and so I'm stepped on there to preach on the podium because
Was
actually,
your
like
dad a preacher?
he was an educator. So my parents are
Okay.
educators, and he
Okay.
did preach, and he does preach at times as well. But he was
Okay.
an elder in the church, and
Okay.
um, there was also like this big drive of like this um, young adults, really young kids. I'm not a young adult. I was 8, but like this
Hmm.
kids like trying to really train them into like doing ministry related things, whether that's
Yeah.
teaching classes, song leading, um, preaching. Now I'm not a song leader, so
Hmm.
I kind of had to do the other
Yep.
route of
Uh-huh.
preaching and teaching. And the public school I went to at the time, as well as what I think they call like a magnet school. They specialized in a certain area, and the certain
Hmm.
area they specialized in was communication. And so I just remember in elementary school, I was like having this experience in church of like getting up and preaching and teaching. I mean, I saw my parents do it as well,
Hmm.
but then also in my schooling, I was like forced in front of the camera. I was forced
Mm.
to like get up and present and talk.
Ah.
And then my grandmother and other folks in my family, when we all get together, there's always you got to do a speech. You got to do somebody's got to do some type of expressive.
Mm.
And so I would always do a speech, whether it's like doing the MLK I have a dream speech at church
Mm.
or other type of speeches. I was just always kind of forced in the limelight to do
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
And so, in a lot of ways, I just kind of was honing that throughout
Mm.
my grown up years, and then that led into a lot of things, kind of in junior high, high school, and
Uh-huh.
college. So, yeah,
Yeah. And I gotta point this out because I know you know Andrew Hicks, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's one of my buddies. We still talk to this day. You and Andrew were beasts, and you won something. I remember you going out to California. What did you win? You went something regarding preaching because you're such a beast at preaching.
yeah,
Didn't you
yeah.
win something?
That's funny that you said I forget about some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew's a cool dude, man.
Yeah.
I love him. We were doing the next gen preacher search with
Uh-huh.
Pepperdine out of
Yeah.
Malibu, and so they have folks. We were like encouraged by folks at Harding to like submit a 5 minute video, preaching
Hmm.
video. It was actually of I did a segment of a chapel talk I did at Harding. Then like a panel of judges kind of decide people from all around the country, like
Hmm.
would send in stuff, people from high school to college and young adults would send in submissions, and preachers, communication professors, and other folks
Hmm.
kind of decided who would they bring to Malibu. I think it was like 20 of us. I can't remember the number.
Hmm.
And then from that, we had like a 3 day intensive with preachers, communication folks, and others kind of hone the craft. And then there was like a big night of delivering the 5 minute thing.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I was there with Andrew on that, and we were selected as like the 4 ambassadors from that 20-ish group to go speak at a couple things later on that
Mm.
summer. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah.
cool type of experience that we had.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember hearing about that. So that's awesome. So you got into preaching. Um, so yeah, so your parents were educators. What's just sticking in my mind is that 8-year-old version of you preaching. So you've been at this. You mean you went to school, you became kind of formed by this school where communication was just something that you were given these tools to communicate better. So then you pursue Bible and then you kind of switch a little bit. You made a switch from Bible to mental health, which is where you're at now. What was the steps into that transition?
Yeah, yeah. I think it was so when I made psychology a minor, I was kind of going through some of those classes, but at the same time, I can't think it was about through my sophomore year at Harding. I did an internship in the summertime in Fairview Heights, Illinois. It was a preaching internship since
Okay.
preaching was major, and so I was doing this preaching internship. I had taken psychology class, it's like a family ministry class, actually, the semester before, so that spring semester. And so I was doing preaching stuff. It was my first time out of Arkansas by myself. I mean, I traveled out of Arkansas, but like to live on my own with no family or friends, kind of in that space. And so I was preaching or following the lead preacher, and then the associate minister, associate preacher was also a licensed counselor.
Mhm.
And so I remember one moment he had let me sit in on one of his sessions. He was counseling some folks from the community. So the
Mm.
clients, they were okay with me sitting in.
Yeah.
And then he was okay with me sitting in, and obviously keeping the confidences of folks that were in that setting. But I remember we were doing some. They were going through some kind of marital stuff,
Hmm.
and there was a geneagram. I don't know how many of you have done a geneagram. It's basically like it's a tool we use in psychology and counseling. It's basically like a family tree, but it's more in depth than that. That kind of talks
Hmm.
about the relationship patterns within a family system. Sometimes it goes like 2 to 3 generations. If you're a purist Jenny Graham person, listen to me. I'm sorry, I don't know the generations it goes to that make it pure, but normally it goes about 2 to 3 generations back to talk about like what was closeness like, what was intimacy,
Mm,
communication, all of that type of stuff, abuse.
mhm.
So I remember kind of going through that with and watching that happen in that session. And then I had kind of like a flashback to that spring semester of learning about that academically in class,
Mm,
like the benefit of it. And then I saw like in real time how that kind of helped to bring some insight and clarity and even a little bit of healing into that
mm.
type of setting. And for
Yeah.
me, that was like almost a light bulb moment that helped transition that pivot into like, actually, I think this is what I want to do.
Wow.
I want to be able to kind of sit in some spaces and help folks through whatever difficulties they may be experiencing.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the trajectory or the thing that kind of led me to do a little bit of a pivot, but it wasn't too much of a pivot. I
Yeah,
like
not completely. Yeah.
yeah, I had that in mind, and so kind of went on throughout the rest of undergrad at Harding, and then from that process, I was doing some ministry at a local church here in the Little Rock area, at Pleasant Valley Church, and working with small groups while also like adult small groups, while also going through grad school at the
Mhm,
same time. So I was working while going through grad school for mental health counseling,
mhm.
and so I was like. Almost playing hopscotch or going back and forth between
Uh-huh.
the theological and ministry work and the clinical counseling
Yeah,
process.
man,
Yeah,
which is amazing.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, I want to
um,
pivot a little. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Were you gonna
yeah.
say
No,
something?
no, no,
I
no.
I was just gonna pivot before, I haven't even got through the questions. So this
Oh,
is
you're
just
good.
this is the first question still. I want to
Yeah,
know about kind of about what you're doing recently. I know you just talked about, you just finished your PhD program. So what are you excited about recently? And I'm sure that's probably part of that discussion, but can you talk about that?
mhm.
What are you doing now, and what are you excited about these days?
Yeah. I think I'm excited about. Well, first, I think there's a lot of reasons to despair. So I really like that question.
Yeah.
Like, what am I excited about? Because there's a lot to be mournful of. A lot of people
Yeah,
suffering,
that's right. Yeah.
a lot of social unrest, and I think the thing that I'm excited about a lot is I think the hope that church and faith and spirituality offers,
Mm,
and particularly the Christian faith, and particularly for me and my spirit, my relationship, the Black church. I
mm,
think that historically in times of, I mean, we know this, especially in the civil rights and even going back before that,
mm,
that the Black church has been that place that has been spiritual nourishment for folks,
mhm,
but also social activism. Like,
mm.
if you're not going to be allowed in schools or you're going to be in subpar schools and you're not learning well, we're going to teach you how to read and write and math and
Yeah.
all. If you don't
Yeah.
have enough money to make it through the week, we're going to find a way to get you through the week.
Mm,
Um, and and for me, that is what I've been really excited about. What gives me a lot of hope is that in a season such as this, where there's just so much like polarization in our country in the U.S., um, in ways that folks who have been marginalized, particularly Black folks, other people of color, um, the the balm, the healing that the gospel still saves. And
mm.
not just like this theoretical, spiritualized gospel, but like the
Yeah.
actual gospel that is embodied, that Jesus
Yeah.
came incarnate and he
Mm.
fed people and
Uh-huh.
he also died for us and he also
Yeah.
raised from the grave.
Uh-huh.
Um, he also healed people physically.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like this holistic response that he sees Zacchaeus, who is basically like the IRS folks taking people's money, and
Mm,
he
mhm,
encounters Jesus, and he's like, I need to repair reparations for folks who I
mm.
have um, I have wronged. I need
Yeah.
to pay back, and so that's what gives me hope. That's a lot to say. The thing that gives me hope is that um, the embodied presence of the church that's
Mm.
not afraid to enter into the waters of our current landscape, but
Yeah.
it's also not so caught up in it that we don't forget that Jesus is King. I
Yeah.
don't think that those things are opposed. Those things
Uh-huh.
are together, and so yeah, that's kind of what I'm excited about, and that actually goes back to some of like who I am, and what kind of brought me here a little bit. It's kind of what I've seen growing up in those first half of life of like we're talking about Jesus saves, we're singing the songs, we're baptizing, we're doing all the historic Christian stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time we're going down to the courthouse and we're advocating for folks in our local city who are
Mm.
bringing this to the marginalized. We are
Yeah.
at the same time having a health fair for folks in our neighborhood on a regular or consistent basis. And so that's what gives me hope in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Is the embodied presence of the church.
Man, those are some words I love. I love embodiment. I love holistic language around this faith because I think there's been parts of my life where I don't know, I just felt like we're just addressing one thing, and I think the gospel has something to say about more than just this one thing. And a lot of that one thing was afterlife. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
even like, what do I think about a certain doctrinal issue? Like, okay, yeah, that might be an important thing to talk about, but what else, man? Like, there has to be more to this faith than just getting things right and what happens
Mhm.
after I die. There has to be more, and I think what you're talking about is more. There's an embodiment of the faith. There is a participation in participate the participation in the kingdom that can start now, right? This is something that's real. It's
Yeah.
something that yeah, that affects all of our reality. This is the type of Christianity I hear you talking about, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Holistic. Yeah. That's the part that has actually saved my faith in a lot of
Mm,
ways. When I have gone
same
through
here.
those valleys, it is that Jesus came in flesh.
Yeah.
He was resurrected,
Hmm.
fleshly body. And
Yeah.
so this fleshly body means something. And even more than that, my black, brown skinned body,
Mm,
similar to the body of Jesus, means something in a world that wants to tell me that it doesn't mean
that's
much.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not to
Mm,
say that other folks' skin is not valuable, but it is to say that I do have value as well. And
yeah. That's right. That's important, man. We'll talk a little bit about your dissertation, if you would
yeah.
like to do that, or just what your emphasis was in your studying for your PhD.
Yeah, yeah, man. This was a culmination of a lot of kind of what, like, just my own personal journey, and then also it it was looking at the experience of this holistic approach to mental health. So I come
Mm,
from like my training at Harding and my master's at work was in clinical mental health counseling. So I've been a licensed counselor for a few years. I've actually gone back and forth between um, seeing clients full time and teaching slash doing administrative work part
mm-hmm.
time,
Mm-hmm.
and then vice versa, like going through seasons in the past, maybe 4 years, 34 years doing both of those things,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of consulting mixed in that. And so I've worked in a lot of different settings and I've taught students, undergrad and grad students. And the thing that I always kind of come back to in my clinical work and in um, my own clinical work and then also in my teaching is how like the counseling profession would come from this what we call this biopsychosocial spiritual approach. I like to call it that
Mm.
biopsychosocial
Say that
spiritual
again.
approach.
Hold on. Say that
Yeah.
again.
It's the biopsychosocial spiritual approach. So biological.
Biopsychosocial spiritual approach.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'll break it down a little bit. It is
Please do.
the biological like biological influences, also like our physical health as well. So,
Okay.
particularly like my genes expression, the things I may have inherited from folks that have gone before me, like diabetes or depression or anxiety or other kind of things. Also, like my physical health.
Mm.
So, my diet, my exercise, my sleep, all of that influences my mental health and well being.
Mm.
Similarly,
Yeah.
my psychological health and the beliefs I have about me, about myself, things like my
Mhm.
personality, things like my just my mental health and clarity in general influences me and my health socially. So like my family, my job, my community or my neighborhood, my church background influences me and the ways that I heal or don't heal. Then
Mhm.
also spiritually, which spiritually is more so in the secular space. And I also navigated secular and Christian spaces. Um, but spirituality is like where we find meaning and purpose, and
Hmm.
folks find that maybe in career or relationships, or in finding kind of this drive, this inspiration. Particularly, like we know this, I know this just like personally and clinically, but also empirically, we know that particularly Black Americans find a lot of meaning in religiosity. So,
Hmm.
particularly Christian faith
Yeah.
has kind of given folks meaning and purpose. And so all of that, that I think about that, I operate from that framework. That's what I've been trained in, the bio, psychosocial, spiritual model of, I like to call it, the lack of health and healing.
Mm.
If I get messed up in one of those areas,
Hmm.
I can also heal through those areas as well.
Yeah.
There's something I can do.
Hmm.
Um, I need to lean on maybe some professional support or social support or spiritual support to kind of
Mm.
help me navigate things. And so this dissertation was birthed in a lot of that. Um, Particularly for Black higher education professionals. And
Mm.
so, folks that are faculty members, that are staff members, that
Hmm.
are teaching in the classroom, an academic experience, those that are administrators, um, and then also staff members, those maybe in like student life or counseling, housing, all those different places.
Hmm.
And so that's what my dissertation was birthed in,
Okay.
also my lived experience in that, but also
Yeah.
working with folks that come from those identities and perspectives, and I was able to kind of develop from the research some like a program. That's one of the reasons that drew me to this particular PhD program at Regent University in counseling and psychological studies. Regent is a faith-based institution,
Hmm.
accredited, and it's really a lot of folks that I've worked with in some higher education spaces have gone through their PhD programs at Regent. But I also did a particular emphasis or concentration in industrial and organizational psychology.
Hmm.
Um, Basically, what that means is like I'm aware of like the systems that
Mm.
we operate in, and so
Yeah.
when a client shows up in my office, when I went through this dissertation process, when I'm teaching, I'm aware that we don't just come into the room, and I don't just come into the room with um, with my own DNA, with my
Mm.
own expressions of my physical health, with my own psychological or spiritual realities. I come in it knowing that I'm a part of a social reality, like
Mm.
that there are things that have influenced me for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Um, and so I really am curious on how we work within our systems to help people heal and thrive, and particularly like our church systems,
Mm.
our healthcare systems that have disadvantaged folks, and also have helped folks in some ways too. So that and I could talk for hours about my
I'm
dissertation,
sure.
but
Yeah.
that's just kind of the basis of it is
Hmm.
that we have found ways that we have been broken in a lot of ways, but also there are ways that we can heal, particularly
Hmm.
biopsychosocial, spiritual. And I was
Yeah.
really keen on like having Black scholars and Black um, Afrocentric work in the dissertation that
Mm.
was strengths based versus deficit based. I think
Mm.
it's easy to say that, oh, we got systemic injustice, racism,
Hmm.
the effects of white supremacy that can negatively and have negatively impacted people's mental health and well-being, their
Hmm.
social realities. And we
Yeah.
have empirical data to support that,
Hmm.
have experiential testimony to support that as well.
Yeah.
But in the words of, and I was actually giving a presentation to a group of some folks a couple of weeks ago, higher ed folks, and I was talking about this strengths-based perspective, and I was remembering the words of E.B. Du Bois,
Hmm.
Du Bois that said, he said, "How does it feel to be a problem?"
Mm.
And 1903, here we are in
Hmm.
2025, and I think
Yep.
oftentimes we problematize folks, particularly Black folks and other marginalized people. Sometimes we problematize ourselves, and so
Mm.
I want to be really keen on, yeah, there are maybe problems or systemic injustices, but Black folks have systemically survived,
Mm.
systemically created. We have
Uh-huh.
actually made a way out of no way. And it wasn't us, it was God that
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
allowed us to make a way out of no way. And so, how do we both acknowledge the hurts and the pains, but don't get stuck in that, but
Hmm.
lean on the ways in which we've made it through or making it through our strengths
Yeah.
that we can lean on, and so, and that's really like my perspective in my clinical work as well. I know people
Mhm.
come into my office with a variety of problems: anxiety, depression, PTSD, religious hurt, trauma,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yet they're still here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really curious, like, how are you still here after all the hell and high water that you, like, how are you here? And
Yeah.
focus on that. That is not a toxic positivity that all things are sunshine and rainbows, but it is
Yeah.
a very, I call it, it's my hill to die on.
Mm.
I don't look at folks, including myself. I try not to look at folks through only. We don't just bring problems. We
Hmm.
actually have a lot of strength that we bring
Yeah.
to the table.
I love that, man. And as you were talking about, your attention you've been given to these systems, um, a word that kept coming to my mind, and we've talked about this a little bit, but deconstruction of those
Yeah,
systems, not just for the sake of noticing the problems, but also just so we can reconsider some of these things that we take for granted. And I don't know, so we're addressing it, we're asking questions of why and how do we get here. I think so that we can reimagine a different path if that's necessary, or just try to make sense of where we are.
yeah,
um,
yeah,
so when it comes to faith, I'm sure you got some insight about this, especially when it comes to maybe the church. You said a little bit about this, but the church, um, how does the deconstruction process, or just the breaking down and noticing the problems, what role does that play in our mental health? And I don't know, I'm just kind of leaving an open question about that. What role does deconstruction and mental health play in our formation? I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking about
yeah.
those things as you say all that you said.
Yeah, I think that it plays in a lot of ways, a lot of factors that faith in general plays in our mental health and well being. So I'll just like even say briefly, there's a lot of work that I glean from in my clinical space and in my teaching space from a
Mhm.
couple of Black psychologists and researchers, Dr. Rita Walker, African American lady, and Dr. Earl Turner, African American male from Pepperdine, and and they talk a lot about kind of the Black experience with mental health
Mm.
and how actually we know empirically. There are a couple studies that they cite they have done, and then others as well, that things like suicidality, depression, and anxiety that having like a rootedness in a faith community, not just faith community, but faith beliefs, particularly Christianity, has
Mhm.
been shown to be like a protective factor or buffers for folks who, particularly in the Black community, who have
Mm.
experienced those thoughts of suicide, experience of depression and anxiety. That isn't to say that like because you experience depression and anxiety that you're not a Christian or not a good Christian. That's
Mhm.
false. And so that's not what I'm saying. I am saying though that we know that there are some connections with being having that rootedness. It's back to that biopsychosocial spiritual, and that's actually like our social history as Black folks. That spirituality actually has helped us historically
Yeah.
throughout difficult seasons, throughout difficult things that we've experienced, especially in this country, but even before we came to this or were brought to this country.
Hmm.
Um, and then like the role of deconstruction, because we know that no church is and no church system is a utopia or
Yeah, that's right.
completely. We
Hmm.
know that folks are broken and that there are have been scandals, abuse, um, ways that people have been hurt in church, and so people don't want to come back to church or don't trust church, and for a variety of reasons. And I think that's actually valid, like that. You know that you've been hurt by leaders or even
Yeah.
folks within the church, um, and sometimes people take a season away from
Hmm.
faith. I really lean on to like two things with this is like one kind of the psychological or mental health side of it, but then also like when we talk about spirituality, because it's all connected, so it's kind of hard to talk about it
Yeah.
separately. But
Yeah. It's
when
integrated.
we talk about that psychologically or mental health side alongside being within church systems or our own faith journey, I think of the work of I think it's Walter Brueggemann, but others comes from the theological space uh, of like and I think he talks about how the Psalms are like this.
Yeah.
And you got to help me if I'm off on this because you got
Uh-huh.
this background more than I do.
Yeah.
But it is
Orientation, or you gonna
yes,
say, yep,
yeah,
orientation,
orientation.
disorientation, new orientation, or
Yes,
reorientation. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
good stuff.
And I think that oftentimes, especially in popular culture, sometimes we may get the it's sexy to be this in this disoriented or in other words,
Mm,
deconstruction type
yeah,
phase.
yeah, that's
But I'm
right.
like, but if we are deconstructed, if we are disoriented, so if we go with the disoriented word, like we're kind of in limbo. We have
Mhm.
no rootedness.
Yeah.
And so whenever mental health concerns rise, whenever anxiety strikes or someone dies in the family, somebody has a diagnosis, I go through hard financial difficulties,
Mhm.
I lose a job, whatever it is that may be causing me to have increased amounts of mental health concerns. Like I have, when it comes to the spirituality, I'm disoriented.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so I have to find some way, and it may not look like going back to that same church or in that same religious group, but some way of like reorienting myself,
Hmm.
reconstructing my
Yeah.
beliefs. And I think that in a lot of ways is done in community.
Hmm.
A lot of ways is done like myself and God, or just like me sorting out my values and my beliefs, ways that I've evolved in that process. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I noticed, especially clinically, um, and is people are actually trying to, when they're in my office, they're trying to reconstruct or reorient
Mm.
themselves
Yeah.
to something that grounds them,
Yes.
something that kind of settles them.
Yeah.
A lot of
That's the word
ways,
I
that's
was
what
thinking about
faith
too.
is.
Getting grounded. You got to get grounded in something. You just can't be in the air, forever.
Yeah,
It's scary up there.
yeah, yeah. And I felt like that was me for
Mm.
a little bit. Was just
Mm.
like doing all this deconstruction, but like there is no, like I don't have any groundedness. I think,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's a good word. And so yeah, it's scary, and it's also like I think about like a roller coaster. Now, man,
Mm.
I love roller coasters.
Uh-huh.
I can do them all the time. But actually, a couple of summers ago, there was a fair with my nephew. He's, I think he's 10, 11, somewhere there, and he's Uncle Daylan. Let's go on this roller coaster. My wife is not doing none of that. Nobody else is doing it, but I go with him.
Uh-huh.
It has been some years since I've been on roller coasters, and that first one was a lot.
Yep.
Uh, but then we kept going and it was good. It was good. But I
Yeah.
think in a lot of ways when we're disoriented or we are deconstructing without any attention toward reorientation or reconstruction, it is
Mhm.
almost like this free fall
Yeah.
that is just like, and that's hard. Like if I'm constantly falling, um, that's really not a stable place to be in.
Yeah.
And so we want to reorient and
Mhm.
reground ourselves.
Yeah. So two thoughts. The first thought is that this is an ongoing process, obviously, because like
Mhm.
there are things that happen, like you lose a loved one, you might lose a job, like all of these things disorient you, right? And then you're like, oh, you're questioning everything again and again and again. So like this is just an ongoing process that I think is happening whether we acknowledge it or not. I think when we are saying that this is the whole deconstruction, like we're just talking about what's already going on within within us in a lot of ways, and we have the words for it now almost. So that's the
Mhm.
first thing. And the second thing, I'm just thinking about how important like community is, and especially if the community is embracing of you, like wrestling through what you're wrestling with. I mean, because as you're going through all the questions, like you're grounded in community, and the community can
Mhm.
be part of what grounds you. And being around people that say, "Hey, we still love you. We're still with you. I know you got questions, and but you still got a space here. You still got a seat at a seat at the table here, even with your questions and all the things you're experiencing as you're disoriented."
Mhm.
Talk about that. Talk about the role that community plays in grounding us and our mental health in general.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I think about there's some work by a psychiatrist, Dr. Bruce Perry, even as you were saying that, that kind of came up for me that he talks about, he's actually written some with Oprah as well.
Mm.
But he has talked about, particularly, he's worked for a few decades, especially with like children who've experienced who had traumatic experiences, and they're healing through that and working with them and family and community. And one of the things he talked about, he said, and often I try to say this as well when I teach to students, is that healing didn't just start whenever mental health organizations came around,
Uh-huh.
whenever psychologists, psychiatrists, and like people have been healing for a while.
Yeah.
And one of the things he mentioned is that the things that he mentioned a few things that have actually helped our ancestors heal. And this goes into more of kind of what we've been talking about, what we talked about earlier. He said, and I'll just kind of paraphrase how I talk about this, is like constant connection to community is the thing that has helped people go through traumatic experiences, making
Mm.
meaning of the traumatic experiences. Doesn't mean that like I understand it fully, but I've got some idea of like, even if I can't make fully um, understanding of it, I'm still gonna go forward. I'm gonna be able to wrestle with it, almost like that. If I think more theologically, I think about um, was it Jacob Israel,
Uh-huh.
like dealing with God is like
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrestle with that until I receive a
Yeah.
blessing.
Mhm.
Um, and then also like connection to rhythm, to connection to ways that we express ourselves, not just verbally, but through like dance. And
Mhm.
so, folks, especially Black folks and other are like indigenous brothers and sisters, like tribal dances, this
Mhm.
thing that's like trauma actually kind of gets stuck and stored in our body. And
Mm.
and so we one of the ways we heal from that is yes through talk therapy, and there are some particular evidence-based treatment modalities that we use that are helpful for that. But also we heal through like this is what our ancestors have done. This is why dance is so powerful.
Wow.
Is that it actually helps us get that out of us,
Mhm.
that stress. This is why actually when people go to the gym, in a lot of ways, he said, "Man, I felt good. Like that was I
Yeah.
relieved that stress or that
Mhm.
tension." Um, and so it's that, and then also that key thing, kind of we're talking about, is that constant connection to community. It is that okay, we're sitting around the fire. I don't know. I don't. I like sitting around the fire.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking about our ancestors. And
Yeah.
sitting around the fire, we are sitting out on the porch. I
Mhm.
think about people like in my own family and other folks that I've connected with in churches. It's like maybe today it's like we're going to the coffee shop together. Like
Mhm.
we are constantly wrestling with this thing. So like I'm wrestling with it, me and God, but I'm also wrestling with it, me and you. We're
Mm.
wrestling with these questions together
Yeah.
of like, how is it to live in this society today with the social injustices going on, with the evils that are happening? Like, what does God have to say about this? I feel like
Yeah.
God's silent on this. So,
Mm.
what's it like to like talk about, not to just like think about this in my head,
Mhm.
um, but to like talk about this in community? Some of my community in spaces has also been like I want to go walk, I want to go work out, and let me like see listen. So like I'm listening to some of your stuff or your
Yeah.
music, or
Ah.
I'm listening to other folks as well.
Mhm.
That's one medium that we have that I think can be helpful with social media, but that's not the only way. I want to also embody that in presence with other folks
Mm.
too. And so yeah, I think I know you asked about community, but I think that all of those are extremely helpful with
Mhm.
working through some of like our church hurt, our religious trauma, and our deconstruction. Is
Mhm.
that we're working on that thing together,
Yeah.
and we're working on that thing also by ourselves as well, and then we're coming back to the table. It is the it's like this dance. It's kind of this
Yeah.
forth
Mhm.
with that process there.
Man, you're saying some good stuff. And one thought that I have is, you know, I think we all can agree that community is important. And like we want community and we need people, but there are people that are struggling to find community. They're struggling to find spaces where they feel like they can wrestle and they can be themselves fully. You know, I don't have answers to that, but these are just some
Yeah.
thoughts that I have as I'm hearing all this stuff because I know community is important. I know it's good, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree. But there are some people that are really struggling. They want to find community, but there's places where they go into a space and they are triggered in so many ways. Right? They're just
Yeah.
triggered because of some trauma that they've dealt with, because of some hurt that they have. Um, I don't know. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Is it a simple thing as like maybe there's some healing that has to happen before people are more open to community, or I don't know. I'm just wondering about those that may struggle to even get connected to community.
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind is you're not alone
Mm.
in that. Um, I think sometimes we try to force things
Yeah.
of like before we have experienced healing or that we even need some level of healing. And I think it is it is great to be mindful of like what do I need and to like tune into ourselves of
Hmm.
what we're feeling and and so I don't want to rush into things that may make me feel unsafe or uneasy, unsettled in that process. I I think that also like testing the waters can be helpful, and
Mm-hmm.
testing the waters can look like a lot of different things. I know for me, still being in some predominantly white settings, um, I find healing whenever I go into my predominantly black churches.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's like the respites that I take at times. I call it respite. It is this like, okay, I need to go into a space where I know the gospel is going to be preached, but also there's going to be something that kind of sticks with me and
Mm.
like speaks to my soul.
Yeah.
Uh, the space where I feel safe. I actually think, and that's just me and my story, and I think that
Yeah.
just like a part of across the span of people's experiences. But I don't think it necessarily happened because it's so unique to each person's story. At the same time, though, I don't think we have to wait until we're fully healed to
Mm.
like go back into some of these spaces. Maybe
Yeah.
I need to start off by doing some stuff. I mean, we're in 2025, so maybe we need to start off by listening to some folks online or
Hmm.
watching church services or reading some
Yeah.
books that maybe from some people that I think are safe and grounded and sound, whatever sound may mean to us
Yeah.
in that experience. So I think, yeah, a lot of kind of graciousness in it, but I also the biggest thing I think about healing because I get it. It's hard and hurt is possible, but I always kind of liken it back to like if I have a physical cut or a physical wound. Um, it is going to hurt when I get some alcohol in it or
Uh-huh.
something to clean it. But that actually is the healing part to get
Yeah.
that in. But it also does expose me to potentially getting something poisonous or something
Mhm.
in there that could harm it. So
Yeah.
when I'm open myself up to healing, I'm inherently opening myself up to harm.
Mm.
But also the other side of that is I'm opening up myself to healing.
Yeah.
And so we want to be able to trying to test the waters a little bit of
Hmm.
like acknowledging that healing can happen. Hurt is also possible,
Yeah.
but we want to kind of be strategic. Maybe we lean on prayer or some of the folks that we trust to
Hmm.
kind of help us get back into some level of community.
Mm. That's good. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about maybe the importance of perseverance and maybe not giving up
Mhm.
on what we know to be good and beautiful and important, like community.
Yeah,
Not maybe just not giving up. And as I open myself, recognize that I'm still dealing with people. I'm still dealing with a lot of imperfections, but maybe there's some spaces where I can find belonging. There are some relationships where I can find belonging, right? There are some people out here that are still good. They're still relatively good people out here, right? And
yeah,
despite what I see on the news or on my television sets, like people, there are good people here on in our world.
hmm yeah,
Mm.
yeah. 100% agree with all of that. I think that's
Mm.
so good. Yeah.
So on that note, just thinking about the church, just generally, how do you think the church can be better at engaging with mental health matters in general?
Um, I think that there is a movement that the church is that at least the churches I've been affiliated with or asked to speak at or do things within the past couple years,
Hmm.
or that I've noticed from a distance. I think that the church is becoming more open to talking about mental health issues
Yeah.
or mental health concerns. I think acknowledging all of that, that it's all connected. So our physical, biological health, psychological, social, and spiritual. I think that that's extremely helpful. So if that looks like you have within your congregation licensed mental health providers who maybe are doing a workshop on mental health counseling
Hmm.
and particularly like referring to treatment, but also like what are some just like practical things folks can do like
Hmm.
right now to help them navigate difficulties they're experiencing. I think it starts though at the leadership level in a lot of ways is having those conversations about like how do we incorporate this maybe into a sermon series? How do we
Mm-hmm.
incorporate this into maybe some teaching or small group material?
Uh-huh.
Um, I was asked to speak last summer. I was speaking at I think it was in May. I think May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so a local church had asked me to come and speak. I actually have a colleague. I work full time at the University of Central Arkansas,
Hmm.
um, so a secular institution. and then I adjunct and teach at a private Christian institution, John Brown
Mm-hmm.
University.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the secular institution at the University of Central Arkansas where I'm at currently. I have a fellow a colleague who is also a Christian, who had asked me to come to their church to speak as they were sick or out of town or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a mental health focus, and so they were having folks come in the community. And then do some engagement with the whole church, and then I came later in the summer and did some engagement with the teen group.
Mm-hmm.
That process. So I think that being open to those conversations that, hey, I'm not stealing the show. Like, I know that you are doing pastoral work, and that's good and validated in the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we're going to pray about things if we have, like, we're going to put somebody, sister so and so, or brother so and so on the prayer list if they have cancer or if
Mm-hmm.
they have diabetes or whatever it is, but we're also going to advise that they go to their medical provider.
That's right. That's right.
And similarly, we're going to do the same thing if somebody's
Yeah.
experiencing anxiety or depression that are clinical levels of distress.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those conversations, when they happen in leadership, and also you kind of embed that within the system of the church. Speaking
Yeah.
of systems, I think a very helpful book and work is by a guy named Dr. James Seals or Jim Seals from Regent University, where I got my doc and he wrote a book with a couple other folks called Beyond the Clinical Hour. I
Mm.
think it's like how churches can help with the mental health crisis, particularly here in America. There's
Mm.
just like a lot of talk about like how support groups, recovery groups, all of those things are like mental health counseling or mental health treatment is not just you coming into an office with me or another licensed mental health provider. There are things that are already going on in churches or that continue to go on in
Yeah.
churches that we're actually helping folks in our small groups, in our food pantry, in
Mm-hmm.
our like social activism. All of that contributes to mental health and well-being. And so,
Mm-hmm.
kind of see that being prepared for disasters that actually helps us manage through things whenever like floods or tornadoes, storms,
Mm-hmm.
fires, all of that kind of comes into our setting. We have the ability to maneuver. And so I think churches being aware of that and consulting with folks, I think is helpful.
Mm. And I think that's interesting that you said that there's already things that we're doing. We might not even know,
Hmm.
obviously, like that this is something that is contributing to the mental health of those that are part of this community. And I thought about the Black church and maybe how, in a lot of ways, that was something. Just being a part of a Black church and experiencing that type of spirituality, especially as a Black man, a Black woman, and how there are a lot of my brothers and sisters that are kind of walking away from that. And I'm just wondering, the connection between the mental health, being healthy in these spaces, maybe healthier in these spaces, and then I'm walking away and kind of losing that community and my mental health being affected negatively.
Hmm.
So I'm just kind of thinking about that. You know, what has the Black church contributed to the mental health of the Black community? Maybe that's just a general question that I could offer you.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of pros and a lot of
Yeah, I'm
cons that
sure. Uh-huh.
that the Black church has contributed to.
Uh-huh.
You some of the cons sometimes I hear and even have experienced at times. It's like just pray it away. Like
Yeah, yeah.
we shouldn't be anxious or we shouldn't be worried. The Bible says don't
Hmm.
be anxious for nothing and all of that. And I think in a lot of ways that that is shifting, but there's still some ways that is still in that process. That's real hurt that kind of keeps people away from the Black church, generally across denominations, uh, but even more specifically within like non-denominational or Christian or churches of Christ and those spaces. And I've navigated a lot of those in different ways. I think so. There's this work kind of coming to that question. I don't know if you've heard of the Jude 3 project. This is one of the things that's actually been a healing balm for me.
Hmm.
Jude 3 project. I don't know actually what Jude 3 says. I can't remember. But it actually
I don't
talks about
either.
it. Actually, I think it talks about contending for the faith.
Okay.
And so it's actually this group led by a lady named Lisa Fields, who they do like a lot of apologetics for Black. For
Mm.
I mean, it's for a lot of folks, but they have Black scholars across from more conservative Black churches and more progressive Black churches and
Mm.
everywhere in between,
Yeah.
that talk about the issues of like like the hard text in scripture of like the abuse that even talks is talked about in scripture,
Yeah.
people deconstructing through those processes. Like, is Christianity a white man's religion?
Yeah.
Um, the Hebrew Israelites, some of that work in that process, how people are answering and talking about that. People just navigating faith on a consistent basis or daily basis. And they have these courageous conversations and other work that they do as well. But they also have some mental health folks, so particularly I like the work of Dr. Christina Edmondson, who's a clinical mental health counselor. I think she's a psychologist, and other folks that talk about like on one end that are connected with the Jude 3 project. So we're going through like this apologetic stuff. We hear all these things of like reasons against Christianity. We may be
Yeah.
hearing some of that while also experiencing some of the folks within Christianity doing some foolish stuff, particularly.
Yeah.
Um, and this isn't everybody, but particularly like in this white Christian nationalism
Mm.
movement, or that like cause people to say, "I don't want nothing to do with church,"
Yeah.
and that's not even in just white churches. We have to understand that whiteness, or this idea of white supremacy, that
Mm.
white is the best or white is
Mm.
superior.
Mm.
No, white is just like black and just like other things. Like, it's just a part of the our experience, but it's not
Yeah.
superior.
Yeah.
But that even comes and bleeds into, in some spaces, some black church um, language and
Mm.
systems that I think have hurt us in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so for me, and when I talk to some other folks, Jude 3 Project is one of those that helps to try to bring back again that embodied presence. We're having communal discussions. Again, I'm talking about people from super conservative black churches
Mm-hmm.
to super progressive black churches about the nature of God and sin
Mm.
and inclusion and
Mm.
sexuality and all that
Yeah.
type of stuff. But we are courageously like talking about it
Mm-hmm.
in community, mental health concerns, all of that. And I think that's what it takes, particularly in the black community, in the black church. Whenever we can have those conversations, um, they can kind of help us heal, help
Yeah.
us work through that stuff. I know for me, we were actually um, had a respite today from our predominantly white church,
Mm.
and
And
there was
define respite, just a break, just some time off.
a break, time off,
Yeah.
a time to be in a space where you don't have to. You see people um, uh, that look like you,
Yeah.
uh, and you sing those songs that kind of
Man.
remind you of your childhood or
Yeah.
your reorientation in some
Uh-huh.
way. So that's what the respite is.
Okay.
Some of those settings, call out some of the foolishness going on in government or in
Uh-huh.
society more so than in some of the predominantly white spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, so yeah, and even today we were at a church, and I'm connected with. We were at like a marriage retreat, and I was just noticing that the church has like a every week a recovery meeting, like Narcotics Anonymous um, meeting, and a food pantry. Again, a black church. We're talking about Jesus, Jesus saves, and also we're acknowledging that folks are going through addiction. People are
Yeah.
influenced by that, and also people need food. And so, how do we? So we're just like regularly showing up and doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think um, focusing on some of those things can actually help us in our healing of like, hey, the gospel is more than just this 1 hour thing.
Mm.
It's holistic work.
Mm. That's good. Yeah, I love that. This is language that I get excited about because it's so real. Like this becomes a very real faith, a faith that affects every part of my existence. And that's exciting because yeah, sometimes I've been offered this faith or I've been engaging with this faith in just one particular way. Like it's very intellectual, you know what I mean? Or it's very very rigid and just really just about getting everything right and it paints a very small picture of God and then like I'm walking away like thinking that those same thoughts you just mentioned like why would I be with this brand of Christianity why would I be a Christian if this is what Christianity is about. So I really appreciate you bringing in these thoughts about how the gospel affects all these things, how I'm treating my neighbor, how I'm thinking about my health and all these things. So that's real
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah.
On that level, or on that note, you talk about this need to retreat. How important is that? Because this is something that needs to be talked about more, I think. You know, black individuals that are in predominantly white spaces, what is some important things for them to consider when they're thinking about their mental health. Even I've really struggled with identity things my whole life, identity issues, because when I grew up, my dad
Mhm.
was a military brat. I've always kind of been in a lot of predominantly white spaces, some black spaces too, but most of my life has been predominantly white spaces. And I'm very much aware of my blackness in those spaces,
Mhm.
but I'm also very aware of my blackness in predominantly black spaces, which is something that I'm really trying to work through. I know this is another conversation for my counselor. I'm not trying to get you
Oh no, you're
to
good.
dissect some of those things on my end, but I'm just thinking generally how important is it for people in predominantly white spaces to retreat?
hmm I think it's extremely important, depending on the person, of course. And I think what you're describing, I've identified with some of that, and I've heard other people say this, and I identify with like in certain spaces, I have felt whatever it means, too white for my black friends and too
Uh-huh.
black for white
Yep,
friends.
that's me, brother. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, and so
You don't fit
there's the
anywhere.
no, you're almost again back in limbo or free
Yeah.
fall, particularly regarding identity. There's no sense of like rootedness or groundedness, or it seems like there is a lack of that in some way. Um, I think first of all, I know that black is not a monolith. We're not all the
Yeah,
same,
that's right.
and and I think that's helpful to acknowledge or even to counter some of those thoughts of like this is what it means to like talk black, be black,
Mm.
understand black. Like if your blackness looks like me, looks like you. It looks like those who navigate these black bodies. And I think
Yeah.
we sometimes have gotten this lie from the broader society, um, this racist kind of
Yeah.
lie, but
Uh-huh.
even like internalized racism that I'm
Yeah.
internalizing these messages of there's only one way
Hmm.
to be black or to talk or to be
Yeah.
educated or to
Hmm.
listen to things or to even go to certain experiences. So I think sometimes we have to counter some of that, acknowledge that. But I do think for navigating predominantly white spaces, that was like I said, what the basis of my dissertation was about.
Yeah. Mhm.
It is helpful to have those almost affinity groups. So what that has looked like for me, um, so I came into a predominantly white church of a close to 1,000 members when I finished at Harding
Hmm.
undergrad, working in predominantly white space. And one of the things we did within a year or so of me being there, like people want to talk about race relations and all that stuff, but that's exhausting, especially
Yeah.
if there's five black people, like,
Yeah.
and you
You
got
had to
everybody
carry
else.
all that weight.
Yeah, you
But
just need some space to
yeah.
just
Hmm.
be you. And so we created like a group, affinity group, basically. We were coming off some material from Latasha Morrison from the Be the Bridge group, but this was particularly, she talked about, she has conversations for cross racial conversations. But
Hmm.
what we did is she had a group just specifically for a material for for people of color
Hmm.
more generally. But we were talking more about just black folks and like those spaces where we can just like pull down the mask or take off the
Mm. Yeah.
and just be, I think are extremely important. Whether that's in person or virtual, where they're also like connecting to like those things that I'm looking. Actually, I'm in my office and I'm looking at this book by Dr. Rita Walker, who I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
African psychologist. And her book, one of her books is entitled "The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health." Uh,
Mm.
System, learn tools for emotional wellness, and get the help you deserve. And as I'm looking at that, I'm reminded of how she talks about for Black people, it is important for us to connect to our Blackness, or more specifically to our African heritage,
Mm.
which is a communal type of experience,
Yeah.
which is an experience that centers Black music, Black
Hmm.
artistry. I think actually art. So that's why I love kind of the way they, when I heard you preach and share, seeing and all different things, that it is this way of tuning into that part of us, that creativity that I
Mm.
think is resistance in a lot of ways. And
Hmm.
it helps us kind of process, put words to like what we're experiencing. I think
Yeah.
connecting to that type of stuff And so that's through the arts, that's through music,
Mhm.
that's through like the arts of like painting or drawing, dance, music, all that. When I go and experience stuff at like our Baptist churches, like Baptist churches and
Uh-huh.
those spaces, like it is a very um kinesthetic. I mean, black people, we're just kinesthetic in general. We're movement type of.
Yeah.
It's actually
There's an energy. There's an energy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's what I would say in a lot of ways is connect to those things that remind you of your unique identity as a
Mm.
black person, whatever
Yeah.
that is. Because we're not a monolith, but
Mhm.
at the same time, we do have some key characteristics that have kind of helped us heal throughout the ages. And I actually think that that's the beauty of God's
Mm.
masterpiece or His
Mhm.
handiwork.
Mhm.
That different cultures bring their own expressions
Yeah.
to the table. I mean, we're gonna show up in heaven with different tribes and
Uh-huh.
languages and tongues, and so
Yep.
there's obviously some value to that. That
Uh-huh.
actually a lot of value that God places on it.
Yeah.
And so to tune into those things that I think have been healing for us, while also acknowledging some things that haven't been as healing or as helpful for us, can actually help us connect with our identity that God has created us to be.
Mm.
And the last thing I'll say on that is, I mean, it's different, but in some ways, I think it's similar to like when we talk about gender, particularly with men and women. There are affinity spaces that I think our sisters need and they have,
Mm.
and that is not to say that like all men are trash or we don't want y'all here. And similarly, like men, there's spaces that are just for men only. That like it isn't to say that all women
Mhm.
are bad or evil, but it is to say we need some space for us.
Mm.
And so when we talk about race and ethnicity, I think it is that same type of reality.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, because there, at just about any church you're a part of, there's a men's group, there's a women's group, right? So yeah, it makes sense that this is going to be something important for minorities that might be in predominantly white spaces or whatever.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Two more questions. I know we've been talking for an hour. I think
Oh, you're
I could
good.
have you here for 2 hours, brother. Two questions. First of all, is your dissertation available? Is there somewhere we can purchase it or read it online?
um, I think so. I think it should be published through ProQuest,
Okay.
which is where a lot of stuff dissertation wise is
Yeah.
published. I don't know if you need an account for it
Okay.
or if you go through um, like a school library system that gives you access to it.
Hmm.
It's entitled "Shelter from the Storm: Protecting the Mental Health of Black Higher Education Professionals." Even if you like look that up on
Hmm.
Google Scholar, you could see like maybe a preview of it.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I don't know if you have access to the whole thing. I don't
Yeah.
know where that would be.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna try to Google that and try to have it on the screen somehow so people can look into it and be exposed to your work. So the second thing I have is there's a lot of stuff going on. You look at the news, there's a lot of things to be anxious about. And I think it's important, like we've been talking about in this whole conversation, it's important to have things that ground us. So I want to know,
Mhm.
I want to end with this question. What are some things that have grounded you as you experience these differences in your faith, these changes in your faith, these changes in your life? What are some things that have grounded you?
Yeah. I think I'll answer that like I like to do sometimes with maybe I do a lot with a story.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
a few years ago, I was doing some clinical work, actually some work with some of our graduate students at John Brown University. There was like a natural disaster, and we had some local. It was like a F3 tornado that came through the Little Rock area, tore up a
Hmm.
lot of stuff.
Mm.
And so like FEMA and the Red Cross and other folks were there at this local site, providing relief for the community, and a lot of
Hmm.
homes were destroyed. And then we had like counselors doing crisis counseling. So like part of our clinical training is like we're trained in like disaster
Mm.
mental health. People can go on and get other trainings in that, but we do have some like the base level of like how to help people navigate that mental distress or psychological distress and
Yeah.
natural disasters. So this was a very experiential moment for like our students, and so students like ranging from 25 to 60 years old and everywhere in between. So I had a few students out there, and I had them connecting with other mental health professionals, but I wasn't really seeing any of the people that came in. I was just making sure they were good. But there was this one black individual that came in, and they were distraught. I mean, obviously, like we were just not too far from where they had lost their home.
Mm.
They were coming to get assistance, to get a place to stay. to get food, to get all the assistance from government, all that work there, and they were crying, obviously. So there was just a lot of emotional things happening. I was trying to provide some stabilization and that quick encounter with them for about 30 minutes or so. I'm talking with them, and like through the tears and stuff, I asked a question that we ask a lot in counseling, of like, I know this is different, but has there been a moment like where you've experienced something like this, like a stressor like this before? I know this is different, and like what did you do to kind of manage through that? And as they're kind of talking and sharing through the tears, they talked about like listening to gospel music, which is
Mm.
the thing for me as well. But
Mhm.
they talked about listening to gospel music, and I kind of went on with them for a little while, and we were talking and laughing about how, particularly in Black churches, you go on and on and on and singing.
Uh-huh.
Um, and the song they mentioned was "My Soul Has Been Anchored in the Lord."
Mm.
And for me, that story, like even seeing that particular individual's like disposition change for a brief moment of like, there's all this chaos going on,
Mhm.
but what I am coming back to or being grounded in is that this Black church experience, but even more than that, that my soul is anchored in the Lord.
Mm.
And for me, what keeps me grounded is at times, especially in the morning, I'm going to the gym or I sit in the other room in the dark, listen to some music, or I'm on a drive and things are getting over. Even I'm in my office in between clients or about to go to a meeting, and
Yeah.
I'm like, let me just close the door for 5 minutes
Mhm.
and let me just turn on this gospel music. Again, this isn't just a like a, oh, I just want to feel good. It's like actually truths that I know cognitively
Yeah.
that I need to feel within my body.
Mm.
And so that is what keeps me grounded. Is it's been anchored in God, particularly through music, and the arts. If you want to see me cry,
Yeah.
uh, do an old hymn. If you want
Mm.
if you want to see me get really in tune with having a flashback of what God has brought me through and what God is
Yeah.
doing now,
Mm.
give me one of those. Oh, I like the new stuff too, so I'm not against the new. I like the
Uh-huh.
new stuff. Do one of those old songs,
Mhm.
and that will ground me and get me back, get my mind back into
Mm.
things. I love for the old Black church people say that God is a mind regulator,
Mm.
and I know that we know that medication and therapy helps us regulate our
Yeah.
mind. But I think above that and even through that, that God
Yeah.
regulates,
Mm.
and that's the thing that grounds me.
Yeah. That's good. Man, as you were saying that, I thought about this old CD my mom had. It was an a cappella black group, Black Church
Yeah.
of Christ, whole album a cappella, killer. Maybe that's not the best way to describe it. But
Yeah.
just as I listen to those songs, I'm brought back to my childhood. I'm brought back to this very childlike faith that I had, and that I do have in some ways still.
Mhm.
But I love that you said music, because yeah, I gotta share that album with you because it's not
Yeah.
available
Yeah.
anywhere. I just have this CD. I don't even know the names of the tracks or the group. It's kind of driving me crazy. So maybe I'll send you the songs and you can try to see if you know
Yeah.
anybody here. I don't know. I'm gonna try to figure this out. Maybe we can figure this out together. But it's a phenomenal group. It's all a cappella, and they are singing their hearts out. But yeah,
Yeah.
music. Yeah, music is something that
Man.
I can relate with for sure. Man, and
Yeah.
that story is a beautiful story.
Yeah, yeah, man. Well, yeah, send me that, man. I love that. I think that, yeah, connecting to that brings us back to those spaces. Almost like if we go back to the orientation, disorientation, reorientation, it almost brings us back to that space where we were oriented.
Yeah.
It brings us back to, and I don't want to go into all the psychology and the
Mm,
work about like memories and how
yeah.
um, music helps us connect with
Mm,
those things past. But I will say briefly, I did some work in geriatric psychiatry in some of my clinical internship and at Baptist Health Hospital System. And one of the things we would do in groups with folks was play music, like people who had what other folks would say had lost their mind, or
yeah.
they didn't know what they ate that day, or they didn't know like that short term memory stuff. When you played some music from their time period when they were kids, they could
Mhm,
sing all the words to the songs.
mhm.
They knew that it brought them back. And in a lot of ways, music can do that for us. And I think that is God's gift.
Mm. Amen to that, man. I I thought about some Lil Wayne songs too. Lil Wayne
Hey,
and Drake and all these songs I got memorized that are just a part of you could turn it on. 20 years later, I'm singing all the lyrics. Right. So it's the gospel, but we're shaped by all these things. Yeah.
hmm
So I just had to throw that in there, especially in light of what hip hop is up to now with the Kendrick and all this stuff. Like, yeah, I
hmm
just had to say that real quick.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then I'll have to say real quick that part of my dissertation. So there's like the dissertation part, and then the big crux of it is like in an appendix, one of the appendix at the back of it that I actually want to do some trainings with folks on. But it is like this 6 week group that I created from the literature that kind of going over the biopsychosocial spiritual model of health and healing,
hmm
kind of leading people through a culturally competent, evidence based way of kind of understanding who we are.
Mm.
And I got some Kendrick in there. And so I
Okay.
talked about how Kendrick said, connected with, all's my life I had to fight from
Yeah.
Color Purple.
hmm
Um, but he ends just how I end within that appendix with all's my life I had to fight. But if God got us, we're gonna be all
We
right.
gonna be all right. Oh man,
Yeah, yeah,
that's a mic
yeah,
drop.
yeah.
You had a mic drop in your dissertation.
Yes, I did. I did.
Man, that's
Yeah,
awesome. That's amazing.
yeah,
Man, brother, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for all that you've contributed to this discussion on mental health. I feel like I need to do another part of this with you at some point because I still have more stuff I want to ask you about. Yes, you said some things I wanted to probe at those too, but I want to respect both of our time. And I just want to thank you. Thank you so much
yeah,
for your work. Thank you for your studying because it's impacting people. I can tell. I sense that, and I think this conversation alone might be something that is beneficial for some people as they're thinking
yeah.
about mental health and faith, and even their experiences as a black individual or maybe even a white individual.
Yeah, yeah, man. Thank you for the invite. I
hmm
appreciate always like
Yeah.
hearing you, and
Mhm.
it's good to connect again. And
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate your light and your realness. Like
Mm.
that's the thing I'm drawn to. I think a
Mm.
lot, and hopefully this conversation is helpful for folks to just connect again in a holistic way with
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yep.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah. That's good. We got to do this again.
Yes, we will. We will.
I want to thank you for listening to this conversation in its entirety. If you made it this far in this video or this podcast conversation, please leave a thumbs up, leave a like. That helps the channel, that helps the podcast. Review the podcast, do whatever you can to let me know that, hey, I'm listening, I see you. It's always good and energizing to talk to people that are as passionate about what they do as Daylan is. And he's also one of those people that I like to call a humble beast. On one hand, he is a beast at what he does. He is an expert at mental health. He breathes and lives all things mental health. But on the other hand, he's really down to earth and he's able to talk about these things that he's really passionate about in ways that is accessible and understandable to people like me that don't really know a lot about this field. So I want to thank him and I thank you for listening to us conversate. And I would encourage you to continue the conversation with him and follow him on LinkedIn so you can be updated on what he's doing in his profession. In this conversation with Daylan, at some point I talked about this a cappella group that has had a significant impact on my spiritual formation. I don't know the name of the group. I don't even know the name of the song I'm getting ready to play for you, but it's a beautiful song in my opinion. And if you know this song and you know something about this group, please let me know because there's a mystery before me. I had this file full of songs that have no name and I don't know who is by, but I know that I heard these songs growing up as a kid and they have impacted me in my spirituality in a lot of ways. So I'm going to play this song and I hope this song is a blessing to you. I want to be more like you. Come and change my life, Lord, have thine own way.
thy will be done. Make me more like you, 'cause you're the only one. Live inside me, and who can guide me to my home above? Guide my pathway down that lonesome highway. Teach me of your love. I wanna be more like thee. Every day I wanna be more like thee. Oh yes, I do. In every way, every way. More like, wanna be more like thee. What I pray, that's what I pray. I want to be more like, I wanna be more like thee. Ooh, yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Ooh, yes, Lord. Ooh, yeah. Oh yeah. More like thee. Every day. More like thee. In every way. More like thee. That's what I pray. I wanna be more like thee, more like thee. I need you to more